Good morning, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces. Thank you to those who have been to other sessions. For those who haven't, my name is Matt Cooke. I'm from Google. Before joining Google about 3 years ago, I was a journalist at BBC News for about 8 or 9 years. So I still perhaps rudely count myself as a journalist, but I kind of kept those sort of skills in my head. And so the tools we're going to go through today, from my point of view, are really useful in storytelling. So aside from the technology, they're quite useful elements to help you tell the stories and to put the cases across in a different way. We're going to start, though, just going through a few really important details, so some useful details for you. Let's start with the one in the middle, google.co.uk/mediatools. Obviously, in Italy, that's google.it/mediatools. A localized website which will go through everything we're talking about today. Mediatools@google.com is a really useful email address that if you are going to try some of the stuff we're walking through today in your own content, then this is a good place to go if you get stuck. It's not a good place if you have a breaking news story or you're up against a really tight deadline. That's still a good place for your local PR contacts, but this is a good place where you'll get a product person who hopefully will give you an answer within a day or two. And then after that we have the Google Media Alerts at the bottom, which is g.co/Google Media Alerts. What that is a mailing list that, for those of you who are interested in maps, the use of maps, or the use of satellite imagery, this is a good place to sign up and get some of the latest information that we have. Two examples here. One is from a satellite image of Vanuatu after a cyclone, and on the second, some images around the FIFA World Cup. So two different kinds of stories. A lot of these images we collect because journalists tell us they would like them or they would need them. So sometimes if a big story happens, they'll often say to us, do you have any aerial or Google Earth imagery of this site? If we do, then we'll provide that to them, and then also we'll provide it to everyone else signed up on this mailing list because we know that journalists will have a use for this kind of material. So it's a really good place to go. And all the things I'm going to talk to you today will be on this Media Tools website. So you'll notice throughout the slides, at the top, there will always normally be a URL, so a website link at the top. So if I'm going through things too quickly, or if you want to get a better explanation than me on a Friday morning, then the website at the top of the slide is a good place to go. So everything we're talking about today is under the Visualize section of the Media Tools website. And also, for those of you who are really keen, if you want to go a bit further than where we're going to go today, then there's some extra tasks and a bit of homework if you want to do it. Maybe you have no plans for the weekend. The top is a bit.ly link, which has a full run-through of exercises, suggestions and workshops for you as a creator to go off and have a look. This was created by someone in the Google Maps team in the US. Her job is she goes around newsrooms around the world and talks to journalists every day. And for her, this is a really useful resource to point people to. And again, a good place to go back to if you have any questions about some of the things we're going through today. This is what we're going to go through today. It looks like a long, long list, but essentially, when you break it down, it's maps, street view, if there's time, some crisis response, and some earth. And also, really importantly, the question that always comes up is permissions and licensing. So even if there's 30 seconds left and I'm being told to be quiet, we'll make sure we have 30 seconds at least to get to that because it's really important. So we're going to start with how you can do a simple map, so building and embedding interactive maps that you can use on your blogs, on your websites. These are all fairly easy to use tools. As I said at the beginning, my background is journalism, it's not tech. And this first section is stuff that I can do, so if I can do it, then I would suggest that many other people could do it as well. If you do know a bit of HTML coding, then that's great. If you don't, then this sort of stuff is still achievable, but it might be useful to find someone in your organization or your newsroom or someone else who you work with to maybe give you some thoughts or advice on how you put this onto your website. But essentially, no programming skills are required for this section at all. Let's start with what an embeddable map is. So forgive me, but I've chosen home, which is the Google building in Mountain View in California. So you're familiar with what Google Maps looks like. We've got here, the red pin in the middle pointing into the Google building. On the left-hand side, we have the box of information with the address, some pictures, and also what you can see at the bottom right in the red highlighted area are some options there, which you click on the cog, that's where you'll find some of these options. So for example, you can click the share or embed button. So if you're trying to share a location, it's pretty easy to do. Just go to the cog and you get a direct link. When could this be useful? If you're doing a very quick breaking news story and you have no images at all, but you just want to give the website something, so you've got a few lines of copy perhaps, but no imagery, maybe give them a map just to give something to the audience to tell them exactly where this is happening. Quite a quick thing that maybe you'd only use for an hour or two, but until you have a picture, that's better than nothing, perhaps. But lots of information on here. Of course, because it's Google Maps, it's integrated with Earth, so you can have an embedded image, which is that one, but can also look like that with a satellite aspect. Again, gives a bit more of a rich feel to your map, a bit more context. And it gives you a better photographic view of the ground. So, what is this area you're talking about? Where is this breaking news story happening? Can people kind of relate to it perhaps a bit more by seeing it? And I'd suggest perhaps they can. It's not just all on land, of course, when it comes to Google Maps. I don't know how many of you cover the Great Barrier Reef as your patch, but if you do, then there's some aspects here. Just think about some of the environmental stories you could do, or some of the really global stories. There'll be street views, there'll be Google imagery, there'll be Google Earth for lots of different places and around the world, even some, I think, from space at some point, but we may get to that later on. It's used as well for more harder stories. So some of the examples I'll go through will be real examples. This is a real breaking news story that many of us are familiar with of the Malaysian Airlines crash. In this case, CTV, which is a Canadian TV station, wanted to illustrate on their map, on their website, an example of what was going on over in Europe. Here, by using something called My Maps, which is a basic tool, they've added a beginning and unfortunately an end location, and they've tracked it over Europe. What you can see here on the left-hand side is that the journalists at Canadian TV have decided to give some context to what's happening here. So in this case, they've located the Start airport, the approximate air path, so it's not the exact one, an indication of number of people on board, and then along the route, and obviously more so around the crash site, they've added photographs to these map locations. So in this case, it's treating Google Maps as a canvas to tell your story. So the easiest way to do this is by using this My Maps tool, and you can quickly and very easily custom build aspects like this on there. You can even add YouTube videos to some of these icons if you want to. So say, example, if you had UGC content from the crash scene that you had a license and permission for and you verified, then you may wish to add this to the map. Again, this is a map you can embed on any of your websites, any of your blogs. So once you've built your map, in this case it was the crash site, but it could be a map of the Perugia festival, for example. It could be a nicer story. Again, go to the cog and you'll find an embed link. This is a HTML code which you can paste into your website. And that will allow you to, with an iframe it's called, have a window on the world. Again, it can be a satellite image, it can be just one you've tailored yourself. Some other examples of how other journalists have used this kind of fairly basic technology. This is again in Canada. This is a My Map showing a mudslide in Washington State. So here you had a natural disaster, a vast area, no pictures, and this is something that the newsroom did in the first few hours, I think. And also, they've updated it, so for public service broadcasting and public service information. Along here, they've added icons for where the Red Cross shelters were in the area. So by this way, you can really give your users, your consumers, your viewers, your readers, some really clear information to help them at a time of problem. It's also something that you can build with UGC. As I mentioned, this is an example from BBC News. The weather so far in Perugia has been very unusual for me. It's almost tropical weather here compared to what we're used to in the UK. Normally, this is the kind of weather we have, lightning and rain, and we get 3 hours of sunlight a year. The BBC News decided to plot a storm which followed a heat wave. They had lots and lots of images from members of the public sent to them, and many newsrooms will be familiar with that people at home love sharing content with you for the chance of giving themselves a bit of fame or a bit of credibility. So they've decided to plot all of that UGC content onto a map. Again, they've gone into My Maps and clicked on the location of where each of the users came from and plotted it. Here you can see as well, quite nicely, there's an example of lightning and wind farms by Sven. This allows the people at home to really have a rich experience on your website because you're embedding it. So you're not sending them off anywhere else, they're still on your website because you can keep them there. So in the context of the story, it's a useful interactive element to have. There'll be other sort of examples that you will have that will be more appropriate to your market and to your area of specialism, but you can really involve your readers, and it's a good way to crowdsource some of their knowledge and some of their content. Another nice feature of My Maps, which you as a newsroom can own, is the ability to add custom icons. So back here you had the sun and the clouds. They're Google icons, and there's a whole range we'll go through in a moment. But here you have flags of different countries. This is what was happening, I think, during the last World Cup. So the Huffington Post decided to say to people living in Chicago, obviously a big multicultural city, if you support England, don't know why you would, but if you did, then here are the bars and pubs in Chicago, you can go and find them. So quite a nice, lighter feature, but one that definitely people would have engaged with. And you can do that by literally uploading an image of a flag in this case. If actually you go to the International Journalism Festival website for Perugia, you'll see they've done this, but instead of a flag, they've uploaded their IGF logo. So you as a newsroom, you as a publisher can do the same as well. So if you have a logo or an image you want, even images of your reporters to say where they are reporting from, that's another thing you could do as well. So how do you do this? Hopefully many of you will use Google Drive. If you don't, then there's a quick way to download it and use it. Go to your Drive homepage, click on New, and click on More. It's slightly faded out in this example, but if you click on More, it will give you options to add something called Google My Maps. And you can basically create them and manage them directly in Drive, so it's a really useful place to start. You can also manage your map here as well, so you can upload it. You can create it once and then upload changes, edit it as you see fit, perhaps as your story changes as well. Also in a newsroom, if there are many of you reporting on one story to one map, then many of you can edit this map as well, so you can all add information from wherever you are. Something you can also do on the go as well. This feature at the moment is only available on Android, no iOS version at the moment. But in this case, let's say that you have reporters reporting at different parts of the mudslide or from different parts of the festival, they could technically upload edits to this map depending on where they are and what they're seeing and who they're speaking to. So that's My Maps. It's something that you can do quite quickly. It's something that you can share. It's something that gets quite basic data out there. Moving on slightly to something slightly more complicated. For me, this is a tool that is really useful. It takes a bit more time, and this is called Fusion Tables. It tends to be more popular amongst data-driven journalists, people who are more familiar with using lots of data sets, lots of spreadsheets, lots of numbers. For me, I'm more of the other side of the brain compared to the numbers side, so this for me took a bit more time to get the hang of. This tool really, though, does allow you to get large spreadsheets and turn them into shareable maps, charts, and graphs. And I'm going to show you some examples of what you can achieve with it. Although it does take a few more hours to get your head around this kind of stuff, you'll see the results are really impressive and does allow you as a publisher or as a journalist to really put your own stamp on the maps, much more so than My Maps, which still can look like it's a Google map. The ones we're going to go through now can look really, really like your own brand. So let's give some examples. We're going to start with one which is perhaps well known. Many of you may have seen this already. This is one from the Guardian newspaper in the UK. So they work with a spreadsheet from WikiLeaks documenting all the deaths and injuries during the Iraq War. Each one of these red dots represents a story. If you were to click on one of the red dots, it would bring up a box of information which would tell you about an incident that took place according to the WikiLeaks documentation. Thousands and thousands of rows of information in one spreadsheet that they've translated into a map that people at home can explore. Click on one dot and it may come up with a story about how 3 people lost their lives. Tragic story, but also it gives you in one look a real sense of what was going on in Iraq at the time. To tell this data story, the Guardian used a fusion table to map each of the incident, and I think when you see it in context and you understand what each of the dots actually represent, it's a really powerful visual. You can easily share and embed this image once it's created, so it would have taken them some time to go through all this data, to clean it and to visualize it, but once it's created, it's an asset that they could use for months on. You know, they could update it as they heard more information perhaps. It's something that they shared on social media. It's something they had on their website to tell 10 different stories over the course of the war. And for developers, there's also an HTML code there if you want to embed it into your website as opposed to just posting it as a link or an email. Heading over to the US, this is a different take on fusion tables. This is the San Francisco Chronicle. Airbnb, which many of you will know is a kind of a trend taking place in lots of cities in Europe at the moment where you can rent out your home. In San Francisco, it's also a thing. And here the local newspaper there used fusion tables, and they wanted to map the average price of Airbnb rentals, so how much people were charging you to stay in their home. And they also wanted to create this on a heat map. So you'll see the different parts of the city in green relate to the average price of Airbnb units. So basically, the darker green, the more expensive that property, that Airbnb rental was. And obviously it links through to location and neighborhoods. And then on top of that, they wanted to see how this correlates, this new kind of hotel, people's homes, how that correlates to the old kind of hotel, the one that many of us will probably be staying in this weekend. So all the purple dots represent hotels. Here they're telling the story of how accommodation in the city of San Francisco is changing. All of this is 2 spreadsheets merged together on a fusion table, represented on a map that the San Francisco Chronicle could embed on their own website. Let's head back home to Europe. This is a Swiss example. In this case, they're wanting to display, I'll make sure I get this right, the ethnic Russian populations living in countries surrounding Russia. Obviously, a big story to tell at the moment in terms of Ukraine. And here they're using a fusion table to represent data they've got from, say, a public data website or a survey they've been sent by someone or their own data they've collected. How they've done this is they've used a spreadsheet of that information with the figure of 10%, 5%. And what they've needed to create this heat map, again we're seeing the darker the colour, the higher the proportion of people living there, is they've used something called boundary data. So if you were to go off tomorrow or today and do this kind of tool, this kind of exercise, and you had this information, you can go to Fusion Tables, which I'll show you a moment how to do that, and create something similar to this, but unless you have the boundary data, which shows you literally the boundaries of every single country in the world, then it would look less clear and won't be as useful for you. The boundary data basically gives you an idea of the size of each country. That's data that's publicly available. And again, you can find on tools like Google Public Data. So some people have done the work for you already, so you can find out, for example, in this case, what are the boundaries of Ukraine, what are the boundaries of Kazakhstan. You get that piece of data, bring it into your Fusion table, and then add the data you're trying to track. So two pieces of data, the geography, and secondly, the story you're trying to tell, in this case, the populations. SRF have brought this in, and it tells a strong visual. Some more examples, staying in Europe. On the left, believe it or not, the different areas of the Netherlands. This shows you the proportion of people owning firearms. The darker the colour, the higher the percentage of people owning firearms, perhaps pointing to the story that people in rural areas, perhaps at the top, I'm not very good on geography of the Netherlands, sorry, but maybe people in rural areas have more firearms for farming, maybe? Yeah, thank you. Real confirmation there. And then on the right-hand side, we're in Hamburg, and this is the local newspaper there, showing how people voted in a local election. So again, both of these examples are using one set of data, firearms ownership, voting, and they're adding in a second spreadsheet, which is geography. So in the Hamburg case, the geography of every little part of that city. So that was Fusion Tables. We're going to go a bit further on now to show you, once you've developed some of those tools, what you can achieve by using the Google Maps API. This stuff does require, in my opinion, some extra help. So people who are either developers or people who have HTML or JavaScript knowledge. My maps and Fusion Tables are great when you need something fairly quickly. Fusion Tables, if you can handle the numbers aspect, that's a good place to get something for a feature perhaps. This stuff is perhaps more project-based or request-based. So something you know is coming and you really want people to help you out in the newsroom. So you'll see straight away, we're staying with elections in Germany. This is the Berliner Morgenpost. And this is after the European elections in 2014. So it's quite boring, static, and I wish I could sort of click around it. But if you look at the map straight away, you can tell first off, to me, it looks less like a Google map than the others did. Using the API, which is free, the newspaper here can really tailor it to look and feel exactly how they want. So in this case, it looks similar to the style of their newspaper. We've got buttons down here linking off to different parts of their website. The font, the tone, everything about it just fits in with the brand here. They've also added a search box. So if I click in here, I can type in my part of the city or my part of the country in some cases, and you'll get to your part of the city and it'll come up with some information. So underneath it, grayed out, you'll still see there's a Google map underneath there, but they've decided that's not information they want to show at the moment. They're just going to grey that all out. They're really going to focus on the city. So these are the kind of controls that you can have with a bit more programming resource. So again, this is the kind of stuff that I'd suggest you do need some sort of developer or help in the newsroom on this. With the Maps API, there's some other cool things you can do, not just on the ground. This is something that Channel 4 did for a special documentary. So this points to my thought that if you have, say in a few months' time, there's a big anniversary coming up, or there's a big moment like an election, or there's a story that you've always wanted to tell in a different way. We were talking to someone yesterday who said that every year this event comes up, and every year they have to do the same story. What about next year if they did it in a very different way? They planned it ahead. This is what Channel 4 did with the Maps API. They wanted to show people at home where the International Space Station was at any given time. Just using the Maps API, they've embedded this on their website. I think they've actually involved a sponsor on there as well, so it's a kind of a unique destination. If I can quickly show you if it's going to work. I want to show you where it is now. So this is where the International Space Station is now. It's coming up on South Africa. You can see as a sort of a tool, it's a thing I can explore. I can go around, I can track. It's quite nice. Current orbit, previous orbit. I don't know if it actually does go over Europe, but you can tell the track here. And it does literally change when the location of the space station changes as well. So it's quite a neat thing that people will play around with. And the point here, it's a nice tool, it's a nice thing to play with. It keeps people engaged on your website for longer. It keeps people thinking about the story you're talking about. Hopefully this will load. Here we go. Fingers crossed. So in that case, it was a really fun example. There's some other things that we're seeing in different parts of the world, or going back to Canada, where there's a lot of good examples here. Maybe because Canada is such a massive country, they can't always get pictures quickly, perhaps. That's one thought. In this case, it's a story about a city, Edmonton, in Canada, and they're telling an historical story about where historical oil spills have happened. So it's not something that's, must happen now, but by 9 o'clock has to happen, get it out. This is a story that they want to tell using perhaps data they've found through freedom of information or research, old-fashioned journalism, finding a document. This is a nice visualization that tells people living in this city, oh wow, if I hover over where my home is, that's where there's an oil spill 37 years ago. This time we're in South America, I think, for this one. This is a newspaper asking people in Brazil, how they could improve their community. So again, we're going back to what the BBC did with the weather. They're plotting people's UGC comments and videos and photographs onto a map. So this is a city, I think, it's Sao Paulo, and people here are talking about their thoughts on what their community looks like, the environment, security, transport, and adding their comments and their questions. This could be something you could do, say, before an election of the mayor in a city, or it could be something you do to track what people are thinking about a change in transport, a change in local policy. Also using the Maps API, and there are other ways you can do this if you don't want to use the Maps API, which I'll talk about. Perhaps I'll move the microphone over there and talk about it. But here, there are really compelling reasons to use the Maps API with this story. This is in Oklahoma, the New York Times, as you can see. So rather than a two-dimensional map, the New York Times are using three-dimensional maps. So we've spent several years, as you'll know, collecting Street View imagery, which everyone can access and use via the developer tools on the Maps API. The New York Times have built a before and after interactive to highlight the destruction that a tornado caused in Oklahoma. So at the top is a photograph taken by the New York Times, a photosphere, which is a 360 view photograph. Underneath it is a Google Maps Street View was taken before. Both of them have been uploaded to Google, to the Google Maps API. And I want to show you the kind of result, because I think it's really a strong example. So, here we go. So we're on the New York Times website, before and after 360 degrees. Lots of different examples, which they've linked to in various articles. If I grab the cursor, which is obviously the hand, we're looking at the house now. That's it after the tornado. Now I'm going to pull the camera through using my mouse or my finger. I'm swiping on my mobile phone, and you're seeing this street before and after. For me, quite a shocking visualization. You can pull out. So that was the home before and after. Let's go down here. That's the sign, Heatherwood. There it is there on the before. So an entire community basically nearly flattened by a tornado. Very powerful imagery. So that's one interactive way you could do it. We know that other people do take screen grabs of Street View, and they use that. We'll get to that in licensing. It's fine to do. The imagery is not dynamic. It won't change, but you can do that. And we see as well lots of people, particularly for big breaking news events, will use Street View imagery like this rather than something over the skies that we started with. But we'll get to Street View in more detail in a moment. Also, it's not just restricted to outside. Street View, for those who want it, is also inside as well. So many libraries, government buildings, palaces have allowed Street View cameras to come in, and you can guide yourself around. So I think you can guide yourself around the Eiffel Tower. You can guide yourself around the South Bank in London, lots of landmarks around Europe, basically. A good way to tell a story, again, if you don't have any pictures or if you want people to just explore a bit more on your website. The New York Times have done something slightly more interactive. Many of you will have parts of your website which focus on reviews, or talking about, say, if you do reviews of destinations, travel, or food, or nightlife, then this is a interesting thing to consider. Again, using the Maps API. You can see, looking at the map, it does look a bit more like a Google map than, say, the Berlin example, but the fonts are very much New York Times. It feels like a New York Times product more than before. So they've got a thing which I wasn't familiar with, but is very big in the US, called 36 hours. So it's literally like what would you do in 36 hours in this city? So they highlight a dozen or so of the best places to look out for if you're in a city. In this case, it's Vienna. In the past, they would have had a static map that someone in their graphics team maybe spent a while creating. In this case, they switched it to an interactive Google map, which they've embedded. And the developer tool allows you to go in and you can click on each aspect. So in here, Ulrich Cafe, where you can see a link to the website and also a bit of review content and encouraging people to save it to their own map. And when you sign in to your own map as a consumer, if you have added this to your own map, then it will come up with a little sign indicating you found it via the New York Times. So it's quite a nice thing in terms of loyalty for your readers. This is what it looks like. So, for example, on the right-hand side on my mobile phone, I've signed into Google, and I've decided that I want to go to the Ulrich. So I've said save to my maps, and you can see it says saved from 36 hours. That could be La Stampa, Guardian, could be whatever your brand is. But again, it gives a bit more loyalty and encourages people who found your content once to come back to you next time to find it again. So these kind of things are things you can implement, if you've got the content that people will want to share. So all of the Maps API stuff you'll find on this website. As I said, the My Maps example and the Fusion table example you'll find by going to Drive, clicking on Create New and adding it. So that screen grab, remember I showed you where you could find My Maps. That's where you'll find Fusion tables as well. This Maps API is a product that's free to use, but I think, again, it's something that maybe either take some time over or get some help from a developer in your newsroom if you have one. Okay, so we're going to go to Street View now. We briefly touched on it in the last one with that New York Times example, but there's a couple of other things that I want to show you, again, just to give you an extra element in terms of imagery. So many of you will be familiar with street level photography. What you may not be familiar with, though, is historical street view imagery. I wanted to show you one, but I couldn't download the right plugin on that laptop, of my hometown, London. There's a great street view of Oxford Circus, which back in 2007 looked kind of busy. Then we realised we were told we had the Olympic Games. So if you've lived in an Olympic city, the years before are quite busy. They dig up the roads everywhere and they make everything look pretty. So historical street view of Oxford Street shows you the changes where it's gone from normal, chaotic, Olympics. And it looks pretty again. In this example, it's showing you the construction of a skyscraper. It's not everywhere. If you go to, say, a landmark in your home country and look for the street view, which is literally grabbing the yellow icon and dragging it onto a street, if you notice in the top left-hand side this little clock image, that indicates to you that there is data available to go back in time. And this goes back to 2008, before this huge skyscraper was built. Great for a time-lapse visualizations to tell you how a neighborhood has changed, perhaps. Certainly, sticking with the Olympics, East London, where the Olympics were hosted, changed dramatically in the space of 5 years. A really interesting way to show that would be to go back and show the changes in that one location. Some others have used this historical street view for breaking news as well, or again for the point about how communities have changed. You'll have maybe seen examples like this. This is the Wall Street Journal. It's showing how Brooklyn as a neighborhood has gone from being somewhere that perhaps is slightly rough around the edges to very trendy and full of 20-somethings who drink soya coffee. And here they've got a before and after, literally using that historical street view. They've screen grabbed it, and they've added here their own little button. So this is not a Google tool, this is something they've added. But this allows the consumer at home or on their phone to swipe back and forth to show the difference between the two corners of the street. So what you're seeing here is, a road interchange. On the right-hand side, it's all fancy coffee shops and wine bars. On the left-hand side, it's kind of kebab shops and, litter on the floor. So it's a really quick way of showing the difference between 2007 and 2013. So a lot of people normally ask around this time screen grabs and permission and all this sort of stuff. We'll get to permission at the end, but just to point out, I wouldn't be showing you this example if it's something that we wouldn't say you could do. So this kind of thing is fine to do. We'll just show you what we request in terms of permission at the end. But I think a good example. Let me try. I think maybe that one I did. I think because the plugin didn't allow me to. There's a plugin which is a Flash plugin which allowed me to do it. So there was a Street View example here I wanted to show you, and also there was a before and after on there. Let me just see if it works. So we're coming up to the article now. I think it won't allow me on this. I've had to change over laptops, unfortunately. There will be examples that you'll be able to find. I don't know how best to. Perhaps if I'll tweet it. How about that? And then you can see it on there, because that's probably a better way of doing it. Let me do that, in fact, at the end. Or if not, come at the end and I'll just show you on my laptop. That might be an easy way of doing it as well. But for me, it's a really nice example of doing something a bit different that people we know will want to play with. Something similar that the Washington Post did. Again, this is just showing development in their part of the city. Come on. Let's read it. If not, we'll stay to this. Again, they're showing an example that hopefully will be loading, an example of how development in their sort of downtown area has gone on. Let me just try and get this back for you. Sorry about this. That's what happens when you use Internet Explorer. In a moment, we'll go through a couple more bits, and then we'll get to crisis response. I want to try and get some questions in if there are any. Don't do that. Okay, I might, if you don't mind, just maximize this screen. Can you see that? No. Is that okay? It's not ideal, is it? Okay, let's plough through, and then I may try again in a moment when we have a second. Two more examples which are moving on. So this was the Washington Post example. So you can see here, before 2007, 2012, so comparing a neighbourhood, how it's changing. We're going back to Canada again. If you want another quick, easy way to tell a story, there's something you can use called a photosphere, which is similar to Street View, but it's something you can create on your own. So who knows what a photosphere is? It's a 360-degree photograph that you can do using your phone. So in this case, and again, I can show you perhaps on my laptop, they're talking about how a school is preparing for, it's a brand new school they're opening, and they want to tell the local people what this school looks like. So the journalist goes in with the mobile phone, clicks on the Photosphere app, which you can download from the iOS store, iTunes, or if you're using Google, you'll find it on Google Photos. It's called Photosphere. You go in, there it is there. You find the blue dot and start taking photographs. It takes a bit of practice. I've done many on holiday, which make me look like I've had too much to drink because a slight judder. So you have to have a steady hand. Maybe do this to begin with. It's a really quick way of creating a 360-degree photograph that we know people like to enjoy. Some examples here of a fairground or of people at a beach, but the news examples were inside a hall. Not particularly interesting in that case, perhaps, but again, if there's a new public building that's opening that you're covering, or if you're at a press conference and you just want to give a different kind of image, this is a way to do it. So, take the photograph using Photosphere in the Google Camera app, or if you're using iOS on the there you go, on the Photosphere camera app, and then upload it to Google Maps as well if you wish to, and then it's available for everyone, or you can keep it for yourself and upload it in your own way. Some people who love photography have special cameras that do this. So this is DSLR and also Ricoh Theta. Ricoh Theta, we know that a lot of, away from news into music, a lot of bands take Ricoh Thetas on stage with them during their concerts now and do amazing 360 photographs of the arena full of people. It's quite cool photographs. And they're the kind of things that were used. This one on the left was the kind of thing that was used by the New York Times to take that photograph of after during the tornado in Oklahoma. And as I said, once you've got your photo, if you do want to upload it to Google Maps, then this is how you do it. You can upload it to your own Google Drive. Make sure your geolocation is turned on, which gives a longitude and latitude of where you are. And then it can be accurately placed on Google Maps for you and others to use and embed. It's quite a nice way of just giving a bit of local imagery from your hometown or the area you cover as well. So let's quickly go to Google Earth. And this goes back to where we started about why it may be useful to get onto that mailing list, because this is the first example. So the best thing about Google Earth, and many of you probably have gone onto Google Earth once and flown like Superman to your home, and then thought, right, what do I do now? Let's go to the Eiffel Tower. Okay, fine, see you. How could you use it in news? How could you use it in some of your content? This is a good example. It's a story going back to 2013, which I remember was a gas facility in Algeria, was a scene of a hostage situation. Early 2013, in the middle of Algeria, clearly no stringers, no journalists nearby, no real access to imagery for at least a day or two. And also then when you get near, what are you going to see? Probably some policeman telling you not to go anywhere near the location. Google Earth was used by various broadcasters and publishers to tell the story. Again, no pictures. This is a picture that you could use. Google Earth was used to show the where, the context of the story. Top right, we see an example from The Guardian at the time. So you can tell the font is different to Google Maps. They've used the API. They've used their own labels and information. Some of the others, though, have just used the Google Maps imagery, a screen grab, or an embed from Google Earth, which you can do. Different examples there from CNN and Wall Street Journal. And it was breaking news, so we had lots of people saying to us, can you help? Can you provide satellite information? This is back to 2006, is old information. These were the stills that we were able to collect. And we work with image providers that we work with on a frequent basis to get this kind of imagery, people who own satellites. So if it is successful, and sometimes it won't because of cloud cover, then we'll make this publicly available to journalists everywhere via this mailing list. So other examples, sometimes, unfortunately, it's often tragic stories where people need and want crash sites. They want to see what's happened to this part of the country. That's the kind of thing we can put on there. Also, though, we do environmental aspects where you can see deforestation, perhaps, or you can see changes in population or cities growing in size. Just to make that point, this is 2 images that were from MH17. Again, these images were put onto the g.co/Google Media Alerts mailing list. allowing journalists around the world to download and use as they wanted to in their content. Anyone from Russia here today? Ukraine? This is Russia. This is the story of the Sochi Olympics. So do you remember there was a story about, will it be ready? So people wanted to know that story around the world, and there was obviously a big story about will the village be ready? And if you look at Google Maps, Google Earth rather, in this case, who can tell? This is a few months back. Closer look on Google Earth. Oh, actually, it was ready. The venues were ready in time. This was available from Digital Globe, which is one of the image providers we work with. So they provide satellite coverage, and we say, can we license this footage and share it with everyone? And in many cases, they agree. Using that kind of imagery again to tell different stories. This is flooding in Serbia. This is 2014. Entire neighborhoods completely destroyed by flooding. Google Earth, also used by the BBC in this case to show historical changes. So again, they've just used the back-in-time aspects of search, and they've created their own graphics. So this is something they've done themselves, but it shows you how, in this case, a refugee camp in Jordan has grown over the period of just a few months. This one is floods in Malawi, 2013 November compared with January. So obviously, huge change there. This one was collected by Skybox, in that case, another provider we work with. Also, historical imagery to track other buildings. This is the preparations for the World Cup. So in this case, the creator has turned 5 historical views of satellite imagery into a GIF. Again, something that can draw attention on social media, can draw attention on your website. A lot of people perhaps in traditional print may say, oh, it's slightly gimmicky, but actually we know in the world of BuzzFeed and people on their phones and with lots of information, they need this kind of imagery or to sort of get their attention. It makes them stop scrolling and go back to your story, perhaps one tool in your sort of arsenal. This is another one that shows a rather hypnotic stadium building or renovations. This is another aspect you can do, and this is, for me, perhaps more useful for broadcast as opposed to print, but this allows you to use Google Earth to create your own sort of imagery, buildings, and even movies. This is one example that I had created, but again, can't share, unfortunately, which shows us Perugia. So Google Earth imagery now, in certain places, not everywhere, normally cities and towns, there will be a 3D version. So in this case, we're seeing my hometown. This is London. The River Thames looks like mud. Normally it's crystal blue. But if you were to zoom down, you can see the London Eye, Big Ben. In a 3D experience, you can go around it. You will have seen things like this before, I'm sure. Again, another way for you to tell the story. This kind of imagery is constantly being updated. I'm told by the people in America, they kind of laughed that it took them a while to do London because the cloud coverage in London was basically constant, so they couldn't really see London. I think they chose the one sunny day we have every 10 years to get this image. But again, using the more sophisticated aspects of Google Earth, this is Google Earth Pro, which again is free. You're able to, rather than get screen grabs, you're able to get high quality images, high res images that you can embed properly. So we do see a lot of people screen grabbing from their laptop. That's fine, but I think if you want it to look as best as it can be, and perhaps if you want it to be updated, then the Google Earth Pro is a good way to go. So in this case, go to File, press Save, and you'll get different versions, different requests on, size, dynamic, and what you want to show, and whether it's tailored or not to your specific requests. So you can see an example there. Some more examples now of how high-res images using Google Earth Pro have been used by the New York Times again to tell a story about wreckage in this case. And again, some more examples from The Guardian about using high-res imagery but adding on their editorial on top of it. So we could spend an entire workshop on Google Earth movies, which are those 3D animations I was talking about. The best place for that, if you do want to investigate that, is the link at the top, bit.ly/KML touring. From my point of view, it's great for broadcast. So have a look there, play around with it. It's quite a fun tool. See what you think of it, and if your areas are covered, more importantly. Just to hammer the point home that this is Google Earth Pro. It used to be something that we charged people to use, and now it's free. All the features have gone through, including high definition, high-res imagery will be on there. You can import and export GIS data as well on there. So there's tons of stuff on there that is now free and available to use. I think we are 1 minute out of time, so I'm going to quickly jump, if I may, to permissions, as I said I would. Okay. So what I've skipped over is Google Crisis Response, which is essentially a way of using Google My Maps to tell the public about what's going on with the breaking news story. You're allowing people to, in this case, I think it's a hurricane in Mexico, to plot a story using different icons. Google Crisis Response, the website there, if you want more information, is really good for NGOs, for charities, for public service broadcasters and publishers. It's a way for you to sort of aggregate public data around a story that matters to you and your readers. So it's well worth looking at, and apologies for not going through it in more detail, but if you are a bit short of time. I want to get to licensing. So I want to review the permissions and licensing rules for using any of the things we've gone through today in your news coverage. So, the basic rule of thumb is, it's fine, and we encourage you to use Google Maps content, but we do ask that you attribute Google and data providers where you do. In the left, we're seeing a map of London. You'll see that if you're embedding it, then there will be that credit in the right-hand corner that says Google. It's a copyright imagery. If you screen grab, it may not. So if you want to screen grab, then we'd ask you to reference Google as a source somewhere. If you're using Google Earth, and this is where it becomes really important to credit properly, because not all the data there is collected by Google. In this case, it's a digital globe. They own the satellites that collect the data in this case, and they are vigilant in making sure that people credit them properly. So be sure that you do in terms of Google Earth particularly. But if you're working in broadcast on TV, then there is a broadcast license you need, which is something that is free. It's a process thing, which you can do by going to google.com/permissions. I'm going to leave it on these two bits. Again, any problems you're having with media, with using maps in any of your content, mediatools@google.com. Your requests will be sort of answered in a day or two, hopefully. If you want to get the latest information on 1, product innovation, 2, breaking news stories, or 3, imagery that we think is interesting because it shows a story, then g.co/Google Media Alerts is the place to go. You can download imagery, again, for free and use it how you wish. If you want to practice properly anything we've gone through today, we've gone through it at a pace, so thank you for being patient, then that is a link to go to bit.ly/GeoMediaLab. I think we may have run out of time. Any time for a question or two? Okay, any 1 or 2 very quick questions? Okay, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great last couple of days of the festival. Thanks for your time this morning.